Good evening, everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about something that affects every one of us, your ability to focus, not just to get more done, but to reshape your brain. Focus is not just a mental skill, it's a biological force that sculpts your neural circuitry. The way you use your attention is the way you train your brain, and the science is very clear. Where focus goes, neuroplasticity flows. So how do we harness focus in a way that changes the brain for the better? Let's get practical. When we talk about changing the brain, what we're really referring to is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience. But neuroplasticity isn't passive. It's not just something that happens while you go about your day. It's selectively gated. You must pass through certain biological thresholds to access it. And one of the key gateways is focused attention. When you're deeply focused, your brain releases acetylcholine and norepinephrine at synaptic sites. These neuromodulators act like highlighters in the nervous system. They mark specific circuits as important. They say, "This matters, save this." That's what allows synapses to strengthen, weaken, or form entirely new connections. So every time you focus, you're literally tagging certain neural circuits for change. Now, here's where people often go wrong. They wait for motivation to strike. They think focus is a mood, but focus is a state, and you can drive into that state on demand. The tools are behavioral, biological, and environmental. First, behavioral structure. The environment you work in shapes your capacity to focus. Visual clutter, noise, unpredictable interruptions. All of these spike low-level stress hormones and destabilize your prefrontal cortex. That's the seat of executive function, goal management, inhibition, planning. You want it engaged and stable, so create a space with minimal input. If you can't reduce external stimuli, use noise, canceling headphones or brown noise to mask distractions. The goal is to create a sensory funnel that makes it easier for your brain to drop into concentration. Second, light and circadian timing. Early in the day, expose yourself to natural light, ideally within 30 minutes of waking. This light exposure increases dopamine and serotonin, which enhance mood and alertness, but it also anchors your circadian rhythm, which regulates the timing of your cortisol peak and downstream energy states. Focus is harder if your circadian system is misaligned. Morning light is a non-negotiable for training attention over time. Third, internal signals matter. Your body is constantly communicating with your brain. Your heart rate, breathing patterns, and gut activity all feed back into your neural state. So if your physiology is dysregulated, if you're jittery, fatigued, or flat, you won't be able to focus. One tool here is controlled respiration. Studies show that slow nasal breathing at a cadence of 5-6 breaths per minute increases vagal tone, reducing sympathetic arousal and increasing focus capacity. This isn't mindfulness for its own sake. It's nervous system engineering. Another powerful internal modulator is movement. Brief bouts of exercise, especially cyclical, rhythm-based activity like walking or cycling, can increase BDNF brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like fertilizer for neurons. Even just 5-10 minutes of movement before a focus block can raise dopamine levels and make it easier to sustain cognitive effort. Let's talk about mental framing. How you think about focus affects your ability to maintain it. When you're trying to do something hard, solve a problem, write, code, create, the brain encounters friction. Most people interpret that friction as failure, but friction is the signal. It's the brain pushing up against its current limits. That's the threshold for change. If you learn to reframe that moment as growth in progress, you increase your odds of staying with the task. You're literally driving the plastic changes that build better focus the next time. One of the most overlooked components of this process is reward, not dopamine itself. The pursuit of dopamine when you set a clear, time-bound goal and then reward your effort, not just the outcome. You're telling the brain, this was worth it. That reinforces the circuitry involved in sustained attention. Over time, this builds what's known as dopamine tethering. Your brain learns to associate effort with positive reinforcement. This is crucial, because if you don't reward focused work in some way, your brain won't value it enough to repeat it. Also important, limiting distractions isn't enough. You must also practice returning to focus. The act of returning attention to the task over and over again is the repetition that trains the network. Think of focus like a muscle. It's not how long you stay focused that matters most at first. It's how many times you bring your attention back. Each return is a neural rep. This brings us to digital input. Every time you switch tabs, check your phone, or scroll social media, you're training a separate network, one that prioritizes novelty, instant gratification, and shallow processing. The prefrontal cortex is highly plastic, especially in adults. If you train it to expect a dopamine spike every 30 seconds, you're making it harder to sit with difficult, slow-burning tasks. That's not a moral issue. It's a neural one. If you want to reverse that pattern, try dopamine deloading. Before a focus session, reduce your baseline stimulation. No music, no notifications, no scrolling. Let the brain settle into a low dopamine baseline. Then, when you begin the work session, the novelty and challenge of the task itself will drive a more meaningful dopamine rise. This increases both performance and retention. Sleep also plays a crucial role in this process. The consolidation of neural changes that happen during focus occurs during deep sleeps, specifically slow-wave sleep. If you don't sleep enough, or you don't get into those deep stages, the brain doesn't integrate the day's learning. It's like doing the reps but skipping the recovery. You won't see growth. To optimize this, track your sleep onset timing and your sleep environment. Keep it cool, dark, and quiet, and avoid blue light for at least 60 minutes before bed. You also need to understand that focus is contextual. The more consistent your rituals, the faster your brain drops into the mode of sustained attention. This is called context-dependent memory. If you always do deep work at the same desk, with the same tools at the same time, your brain builds a pattern library. Eventually, the context itself becomes a trigger for focus. You don't have to force it. The environment becomes a cue for neural activation. Now, let's talk about duration and volume. How much focused work should you aim for? The data suggests that even one 90-minute session of focused work per day, done consistently, can lead to measurable improvements in working memory, executive function, and tasks, switching ability. Over weeks and months, these changes compound. You don't need to grind for 10 hours. You need to protect the blocks that matter. Another critical detail, self-generated focus is more powerful than externally imposed attention. When you choose the task, set the goal, and guide your attention voluntarily, you activate top-down control networks in the brain. These networks are more plastic than bottom-up reflexive systems. This is why autonomy and internal motivation accelerate cognitive growth. To recap the mechanism without summarizing, you enter a focus state, trigger neuromodulators that mark synapses for change, sustain that state long enough to strengthen or weaken connections, and then recover, allowing the brain to consolidate those changes. If you repeat this process with consistency, intensity, and intentional recovery, your brain will adapt. Focus becomes easier, deeper, and more automatic. Not because you got better at it, but because you built the circuits that make it natural. This is the practice, this is the biology, and it's available to anyone who understands the rules. There's another essential layer to this process, and it often gets overlooked: emotional regulation. Focus isn't just about attention, it's about emotional stability. Your ability to stay with a task, especially a difficult one, depends heavily on your brain's capacity to manage limbic friction. That's the tension between your prefrontal cortex, responsible for deliberate, goal-directed behavior, and your limbic system, which governs emotion and impulse. When you sit down to do something meaningful, whether it's writing, studying, designing, or solving, you're not just wrestling with distraction, you're wrestling with internal resistance. That resistance can take the form of boredom, anxiety, restlessness, or even a subtle craving to do something else. What's important to understand is that this resistance is not a flaw. It's a neural signal, and you can train your system to handle it. One tool here is interoceptive awareness, the ability to notice what's happening inside your body without reacting to it. The anterior insula, a region involved in integrating emotional and bodily signals, plays a central role. When you become more attuned to your internal state, your heartbeat, breathing, muscle tension, you build the ability to notice emotional triggers without being hijacked by them. This is what allows high performers to keep working through discomfort. They feel the stress, but they don't react automatically. You can train this through structured protocols like NAN, sleep deep rest NSDR, yoga nidra, or certain types of meditation. These are not just tools for relaxation. They're tools for nervous system recalibration. They teach your body and brain to return to baseline after cognitive or emotional stress, which is critical for sustaining long-term focus. Let's return to dopamine for a moment. Most people think dopamine is a pleasure molecule. It's not. It's the molecule of motivation and anticipation. It's what drives effort and engagement. But dopamine is also subject to a principle called baseline shifting. When you flood your system with constant stimulation through social media, fast-paced videos, or multitasking, your dopamine baseline elevates. That means that normal, slower tasks like reading, writing, learning feel dull by comparison. Your brain has been trained to expect novelty every few seconds. To fix this, you need to protect your dopamine system. That means deliberate periods of boredom, time in silence, low stimulation environments. This isn't just about self-discipline. It's a strategy to reset your brain's reward sensitivity so that cognitively demanding tasks become engaging again. You're restoring contrast between high-effort work and meaningless digital noise. Another major factor in the focused neuroplasticity loop is goal clarity. Vague goals create cognitive friction. Clear goals, ideally with specific start and end points, sharpen attention and reduce prefrontal load. When your brain knows exactly what to do, it can allocate resources more effectively. That's why even a simple protocol like the 5-minute goal ritual, where you define what you'll do, how long you'll do it, and what success looks like, can significantly improve performance. There's also a neural structure called the basal ganglia, which plays a role in both movement and cognition. It operates via a loop with the prefrontal cortex and is involved in habit formation. When you repeat focused effort in a consistent pattern, same time, same context, same type of task, you are training this circuit to automate the behaviors that lead to focus. Eventually, you'll reach a point where starting is easy, not because the task got easier, but because the pattern became habitual. This leads us to the concept of task bracketing, opening and closing rituals around focused work. These can be physical, like dimming lights, putting on headphones, behavioral, like journaling your intent, or physiological, like taking a deep breath or doing a quick movement burst. What matters is consistency. The brain loves transitions. When you ritualize the transition into focused work, you reduce activation energy and increase the probability of entering a hyper-performance state. You should also be aware of focus stacking, the practice of linking multiple short focus blocks across a day. Most people think productivity comes from massive, uninterrupted blocks of work, but for many, especially those just beginning to train their focus, smaller repeated exposures are more effective. A 45-minute block in the morning, another post-lunch, and a third in the evening builds distributed plasticity across the day. This repeated stimulation increases the brain's ability to sustain attention across contexts. Now, consider the impact of nutritional timing on focus. The brain runs on glucose, but stable focus requires stable blood glucose. Large, carb, heavy meals spike insulin and lead to crashes, making it harder to focus. Conversely, working in a fasted state or with a light protein/fat meal can increase alertness. The neurotransmitter precursors you ingest, like tyrosine for dopamine or choline for acetylcholine, can also affect focus capacity. You're not just feeding your body, you're feeding the neurochemical environment for attention. There's also the role of temperature. Alertness increases with cooler ambient temperatures, ideally around 19-21 degrees C, 66-70 degrees F. The posterior hypothalamus, which regulates alertness and arousal, is sensitive to both core and skin temperature. Simple interventions like splashing cold water on your face, opening a window, or walking in cool air can reset focus circuits and increase catecholamine activity. We should also consider social distraction. Humans are wired for social relevance. Even a phone on the table, face down and silent, has been shown to reduce cognitive capacity during deep work. Why? Because the brain's default mode network, responsible for daydreaming and self-referential thought, is hypersensitive to social cues. To access true focus, you must minimize latent cognitive load. That means not just silencing notifications, but removing devices altogether from the visual field during high-demand work. On the neurochemical front, one of the most underrated systems in the brain is serotonin. While often associated with mood, serotonin also stabilizes attention and improves patience. Focus isn't always about intensity. It's also about staying power. Activities that increase serotonin in tone, like natural light, movement, and social connection, can indirectly improve your ability to engage with tasks over longer time spans. Let's zoom out for a moment. The system we're discussing isn't just academic, it's not theoretical, it's actionable, and it's cumulative. Every session of deliberate focus, every return of attention, every ritual, every sleep cycle, every movement break, every dopamine reset, each one contributes to a brain that is more efficient, more stable, more resilient. The goal isn't perfection, it's deliberate repetition. The goal isn't to eliminate all distraction, but to build a mind that can return to the task no matter how many times it drifts. The focus muscle isn't built in one day. It's built by returning again and again across days, across weeks, across seasons. Neuroplasticity is not biased toward the good or the bad. It's neutral. It follows the inputs you give it. If you repeatedly fragment your attention, you will build a brain that's good at switching, not staying. If you commit daily to even modest periods of focused effort, you will build a brain that's calm, precise, and capable of deep engagement. Now let's get more specific about the stages of focused work. There's a model grounded in neurobiology that breaks focus into 3 phases: entry, sustain, and recovery. Entry is the hardest. It requires breaking inertia. This is where rituals matter most. Use physical cues, breathing, environment changes to cue the brain that it's time to shift states. Sustain is where neuromodulators do their job. Acetylcholine sharpens input. Dopamine sustains effort. Norepinephrine raises arousal. Here, minimize interruptions at all costs. Recovery is non-negotiable. Just as muscles grow in rest, so do cognitive circuits. In SDR protocols, light movement, nature exposure, or even quiet time, these all allow the nervous system to integrate what it just experienced. If you neglect recovery, you'll hit cognitive fatigue faster. Over time, that erodes your ability to focus at all. The last point for now, focus is identity-based. The more you act like a focused person, the more your brain wires that behavior into your self-concept. Each session is a vote for the type of person you are, and over time, those votes add up. What starts as effort becomes instinct. What starts as friction becomes flow. The brain is not fixed, it's adaptable. But it's shaped by how you use it. So if you want to change your brain, If you want to be sharper, more productive, more present, it starts with this: train your focus. Every focused minute counts. Every distraction costs. And the good news, you're not at the mercy of your biology. You are the architect of it. Thank you.